Hello everyone, in today's video we will have a look at how to unit test logic calling HTTP API. So let's say we have a code that we perform a request. We want to make sure that our unit test is able to simulate this call to an external HTTP API. For this we will need the library called responses. So if you don't have it installed, you can do pip install responses and it will add the library to your environment. I recommend using virtual environment. It's better to manage packages in Python. Let's say we want to test a logic which is calling external APIs. So let me add this logic. So we need the JSON library, we need requests, app, and let's say we have a logic which is calling an API to retrieve user data. Let's say we have a user ID in parameter. I think it's better to add a type int into your method. It's better to document the code and to avoid errors also. Let's say our logic is performing. Here I have a suggestion from Cursor. I think it's valid. Let's say our logic is retrieving from an URL user information based on a parameter provided here, so user ID. So we will have a response, and we will check that the response is valid first. So we can do response.raise for status. This logic will raise an exception if we get an HTTP error like 404 or other kind of errors. And then we can return response.json. Okay. Let's start with this method we want to test. So usually if you call this logic, you will have an error because the URL is not valid. Let's do this. I can save and I do demo.py. And here I have an HTTP error because obviously this URL does not exist. Let's assume it exists. We don't want to actually perform the call because we are in a unit testing mode, and so we want to avoid any external call. To do that, I will write my test first. So we'll test with a PyTest, but you can test also with a unit test, but I prefer PyTest. I think the syntax is simpler. And let's say we want to first import from a demo the method we want to test. It's called, so we need to do up from demo import fetch user. And then we need to write our first test method. And we call it fetch user. You can add a type int, but for unit test method, it's not mandatory, in my opinion. What we will do here is using a decorator. So first we need to import the library to mock HTTP calls. It's called responses, if you remember. And a decorator is this exactly. So, what was suggested by a Cursor. It's you put an @ and what it will do, basically it will wrap your call with another call. And what does this decorator allow is to describe what will be the expected response without actually performing the HTTP call. So in our case, we need to do responses.add. We need to add the method, the HTTP method that will be used. If you remember, here we are using a get method, so we need to add a call with a get method. Then we can write the URL expected to be called. So in our case, let's say we will test this method with one as argument. So the resulting URL will be this one with /1, because here we will have user ID, the variable replaced by its value. Then we do the expected, we write the expected body, what will be the answer provided in by the call to JSON method. So here, as suggested by Cursor, we can use that JSON with a dictionary with ID 1 and name John Doe. It's perfect. And you have also to provide the status, HTTP status code. So for 200 is the status code when everything went perfectly and when there is no issue. And I think that's it. You can also add some more arguments, but more on that later. For this simple test, then we want to actually call the method. We imported it with the one argument, and we want to perform assertions. It's basically what we do in a unit system. We assert that call was performed. We assert was that value, retrieve value matches what was expected. And with this, we will be able to check that everything is fine. We can also check more stuff as suggested by Cursor. For example, you can check that there was only one call. You can check that the URL called is this one and the response is this one. But this is not relevant, because if you call the another URL that the one that was expected, it will raise an error in your test. Okay, so let's say we want to test this. We can call pytest on this test file, and our unit test is valid. What would have happened if I call the function with a 2 here? I just need to save, of course, and here up it raised an error, because what happened, the first line that failed is actually the call to the request method. Since response is expecting one call with this URL and we are calling with 2 instead of 1 here, it raises an error. Here it's perfectly normal. If we want to complexify a bit, let's say that our function needs, our API, external API, needs a header to validate, for example, that you are authenticated to perform the call. Let's say we are calling like this. Of course, the logic would be more complex. For example, here you will have provided a token argument, and this token would have been generated by some logic, retrieving credentials from a DB, for example, or credentials from an authentication API. So here we just add a token instead of something hard-coded. And so if I do this, if I test this with this test logic, normally it should fail, because we are not providing the token argument, but also we don't. So if I add the token argument here, it will work, because here we don't check the header. If I want to match the header, I have to use this syntax, which will check that the header provided in the call, HTTP call, it matches what is expected. So for example, if I do this, we are expecting this token, but we are providing something else. It should fail. So it is failing because headers do not match. Now, if I provide the correct header, it's working, right? So yeah, it's a simple example for GET request with I would say a simple case a parameter here, just a header, but you can do more complex stuff. But for the purpose of the demonstration, I think it's already covering most of the cases. Now, if you want to test another method, let's say our logit is also able to create a new user. So when you create something new in an API, we need always to provide details, an object that will be used to retrieve the data, to pass the data, and then save the data into the application, into the database application. Let's say we provide an object. So here it's not. It could have been a user object we would have defined, but let's say to stay simple, but it's just a dict. We return. Return type maybe dicts. Let's see. So our logic will create a user. To do so, we will perform a post request. Post request means we are creating something, or at least we are providing data to an API. So if I do a post like this, we will provide. So we will still use the same URL as before. Up. As a JSON, we will provide the dictionary with the data. Let's say for demonstrations that we don't want to use a token, we don't have this API is not protected. Of course, it's not a realistic assumption, but let's say just for the demonstration, we can perform a post without authentication. And it will return the expected response from the call, whether it failed or not. So just for the demonstration, we can create a new user. Let's say we want to create the user called John Doe. Up. Here it fails because we are calling an URL that does not exist. Okay, but let's say for the example that its URL is valid and we are able to perform post calls against this URL. Now we need to write the test method. This method will be called create user. It returns nothing, and for this call we expect to have a call to with a post method. So here we have responses.post. The URL is this one, as hinted by cursor. We have this URL. The payload we will provide, we will define it below, and here. So here it's the payload that will be returned by the application. So instead of this, it should be something like user created successfully. The status will be 201, meaning we have created something, and we are interested in matching what is provided into the payload, meaning the JSON values, the JSON provided into the payload. And now we can actually call the method. We need to import it, of course. And here we want to call user create user like this with this payload, so it matches what's expected here. And we want to assert that the result is this. And this is enough because if we perform a call that does not match what is expected, we will have an error raised by the responses library. Okay, let's test. So we can select the test like this. Test create user normally. So it fails. Why? Because we are still performing the call. Why? I forgot the decorator, of course. Now let's do responses.activate, and our unit test is working. Let's say I provide something else. Let's say I provide the do. like this, it should fail because it's not matching what is expected here. So yeah, it's fine. One last thing we can also check. We have tested the working cases where everything is fine, but we need also to check that this will actually raise an exception when we provide something that is wrong. To do so, we can define a test called test create user error. What it will do, so the same, but this time we are still matching. We are still expected to match a call to users, but this time we will raise a 400 error with an error message. We are still expected to match this payload provided in the call, but this time, let's say there is a functional error, and for example, this user already exists, so we return an error. This time, here we have what's called context manager with something, and here in the unit testing, you can use a context manager with pytest.races, and this will check that you correctly raise an exception when you perform a call that should raise an exception. Here we can be more specific because exception is a bit vague here, would say, sorry. And we can do request.exception. I think it's a request exception. Maybe we need to import it. Okay, to import request. Let's see what is the exception raised. Yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's still working. So it works correctly, but you have to make sure that it's the correct exception that is raised. For example, if it could be an exception raised by responses, and this is not what you want to test. For example, if I do this, it will raise an exception, but this exception is coming from responses, the test library, saying your call is incorrect, but it's an error coming from the test, not from the actual logic. So when you are specific regarding the exception, it's better. So, for example, if I want to check that the logic actually raise an error, I can just remove the context manager, and here I can see that we have the correct answer, the correct response from responses with the status 400 and the correct error. So here we are correctly testing the logic while when it's failing. So I can put back the context manager, and now my test is passing. With this, I think you have everything you need to start testing your API HTTP calls. I hope you enjoyed this video. If it's the case, put a like to the video, and I see you in the next one. Bye bye.